Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, True Crime and Felines. My name is Brandy and every Friday I sit down and bring you a true crime case or mystery with one or more of my fabulous felines. This week I'm doing something a little different. I'm going to share two cases that are kind of shorter stories. It's hard to find a lot of information on these stories, but it doesn't make them any less interesting, so I wanted to share them anyway. So I'm going to combine them into one video instead of doing like two very short 5-minute videos. The first mystery is about Allen Robicheaux and his mysterious disappearance, and the second story is about America's unknown child, a boy found in a box, and his identity is still unknown to this day. So let's get started with our first story. Allen P. Robicheaux was born March 26th in 1900. Now, he stayed single for most of his life. However, in his late 40s, he ended up meeting Lucy May and married her. And a couple years after they were married, they ended up having a child, a daughter. Now, Allen and Lucy would live in happily marriage bliss for about 30 years, and they would end up moving into a house in Gretna, Louisiana. Allen worked as a timekeeper for the Southern Pacific Railroad until his retirement. However, on December 15th, 1973, Allen was 73 years old. He just disappeared. His wife Lucy was away visiting family, and she arrived back at the house that day, and Allen was just gone. Lucy called friends and family, and after a while of unable to find him, she reported him missing to the authorities. An investigation was launched, and police would find Allen's car actually parked and abandoned a couple blocks away from the family home. So immediately they suspected foul play, that maybe Allen was kidnapped or he just simply ran away. Lucy was very little help because she didn't know of anyone who would want to hurt Allen, nor why he would just up and leave his family if that's what happened. After months of searching and no information and no more leads coming in, the case went cold. So Allen was just put as a missing person and put in the cold case files. Now, Lucy continued searching for her husband for a couple years after his disappearance, but eventually she succumbed to the idea that she was probably never going to see her husband again. So she ended up putting up the house for sale, and she moved away to get on with her life. Unfortunately, Lucy ended up passing away March 30th, 1981, without ever knowing what happened to her husband. So after Lucy sold the house over the next years, there were several owners of the house, and nothing suspicious was ever reported. However, in 1991, the owners of the house at that time had a termite infestation in the basement, so they called to an exterminator to get rid of the problem. While the exterminator was looking in the basement, he found this sort of crawl space, and so he crawled back in there because that seemed to be the source of where the termites were coming from. In that crawl space, he discovered this metal sliding door. It seemed to be built into the wall of the basement. So he slid open the door to see what it was. When he opened the door, he discovered a human skull. So he immediately called the authorities. When the authorities came to investigate, they discovered that this sliding door led to this dugout area that actually extended through the basement wall into the dirt and was underneath the porch of the house. It was man-made, obviously, and it was only big enough for a grown adult to crawl into it and lay down. And the walls were concrete to keep it from collapsing. They ended up having to get at this encasing by removing the porch and digging down into the dirt till they found this concrete tomb and broke it open. So once they were able to do that, they were able to see what they were dealing with. So they found a whole entire human skeleton in this concrete tomb. The skeleton was laying face up. At the head of the skeleton was a green duffel bag, and it had a wallet and a driver's license in it. And the driver's license name was Allen Robicheaux. Forensic testing would later determine the skeleton was in fact Allen. Now, Allen was either naked when he died, or the clothes had just rotted away into nothing, as there was only socks on his feet. They determined by looking at the skull and some other evidence in the tomb with him that his cause of death was a gunshot to the head. Blood spatter on the tomb wall determined Allen was shot in this exact location where he was found, so it proved to be suicide. Now, authorities speculated that Allen carefully planned out this suicide. He had obviously spent many hours creating this concrete tomb. He had a lot of personal mementos, such as childhood toys, that was no doubt carefully selected. There were also strange porcelain statues that he had placed strategically around him in almost like a ritualistic manner. And the other items that were found was a candle, a mirror, and a .38 pistol. The candle was for light, obviously. The mirror was speculated that it was in there so he could watch himself commit this act. After the discovery of the skeleton, the current owners sold the property. The house was torn down, and now sits a little upholstery shop on the location. But it's still unknown why Allen did this. Why did Allen leave his car so many blocks from the house? Was he trying to make it seem like he disappeared, or made it seem like it was foul play? Did he think his family would be better off thinking something happened to him instead of finding out that he committed suicide? Now, there was speculation that maybe he had cancer or was suffering from early stages of dementia, and he took his life so he wasn't a burden on his family. But again, there's no medical records to back that up that I could find. Others speculate that he just suffered from depression and he wanted to go out on his own terms. Whatever the reason is, only Allen knows. And I feel bad because Lucy had passed away before he was discovered, so she never knew what happened to him. So what are your thoughts on this? Why do you think he did this? Would it be better to think your husband just up and disappeared, or somebody took him? Or would you rather know that he committed suicide? Which is worse? I would love to hear what you think in the comments. Now, let's dive into the next story. On February 25th in 1957, a small boy's body was found in a box in the woods, just illegally dumped, obviously illegally dumped, in Fox Chase, Philadelphia. The boy was in this cardboard box. He was naked, but he was wrapped in like a plaid blanket. He was estimated to be anywhere from 4 to 6 years old. He weighed 30 pounds. And he was 3 feet 3 inches tall. The boy's hair had recently been cut hastily. It was a bad haircut job is what they were saying. And it was possibly cut after his death because there were bits of hair all over the blanket and his body. There were signs of malnourishment. He had surgical scars on his ankle and his groin area, and he had an L-shaped scar under his chin. However, the cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma by looking at his head. So as authorities started investigating this, they found out that the body actually was first discovered days before they were notified. A guy named John was in the area and he was illegally trapping muskrats. He didn't report seeing the body to the authorities because he was afraid authorities would take away his traps. A few days later, there was a college student named Frank, and apparently he spotted a rabbit run into the underbrush, and he knew there was a whole bunch of traps around there and apparently wanted the rabbit. So he pulled over and gave chase to the rabbit, and that's when he discovered the body. Again, at first he didn't report it to the police because he didn't want to be involved. But after he saw a report of 4-year-old of Mary Jane. Mary Jane was a 4-year-old girl who went missing around the New Jersey area. She was later found in a closet in an abandoned home. It's a very sad story. You should look it up. But no foul play was involved. She seemed to get trapped in the closet. But thinking that maybe this body could have been Mary Jane, Frank then told the police a day later. Now at the scene, they would find a few things like a men's corduroy cap, a child's scarf, a man's white handkerchief with G in the corner, the letter G. But none of these clues really led anywhere. The corduroy cap was actually a custom-made cap from a local person in town, but she didn't keep any records of who she sold to. And when they asked around town about the cap, nobody could place anybody wearing it, so it was a dead end. Now, authorities would pull the serial number off the cardboard box and determine that the box had in it a bassinet that was shipped from J.C. Penney. Now, 14 of these bassinets were shipped out in the Philadelphia area, but customers always paid in cash back then, and so there was no customer information on who these bassinets went to. Now, when the police did put out in the public about these, 8 of the 14 people came forward and either stated that they still had their cardboard box or they put the cardboard boxes in the trash. So hitting these dead ends on stuff at the scene, they ended up taking this boy's footprints and fingerprints and would compare them to local hospitals of the birth records. Unfortunately, nothing matched. So, another dead end. During the autopsy, they also noted that this boy had recently ate right before he died, and his stomach was full of baked beans. At first, authorities were confident that somebody was going to come forward missing a child. However, nobody ever did, and they were running out of information. So the local paper actually made up 400,000 flyers of the picture of the boy and information and distributed them out across the state, hoping somebody would know something. Unfortunately, despite the overwhelmingly public interest in this case, it eventually just went cold, and nobody ever identified this boy or came forward stating that it was their kid. In March of 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a forensic facial reconstruction of this boy and put it in their database just in case something ever comes up on him. In August 2018, Barbara Ray Venter, she is the genetic genealogist who helped identify the Golden State Killer, has taken on this case, and she's using the same method she did to find the Golden State Killer to see if she can come up with any leads or solution to this case, or identity of this boy in this case. So far, nothing. Now, of course, there are theories in this case based on different routes of investigation. Now, apparently, it was a foster home only about 1.5 miles away from where the boy's body was found. In 1960, an employee of the medical examiner's office named Remington was so enthralled and fascinated by this case, he couldn't let it go. He ended up contacting a psychic. Now, the psychic told him to look for a foster home near the area of the boys where the boy's body was found. Remington found the house, and at the time they were having an estate sale. As Remington looked through some of the items for sale, he discovered that there was a bassinet similar to what J.C. Penney sold. He saw blankets hanging on the clothesline that were similar to the blanket that this boy was wrapped up in. After talking to the individuals on the property, there was a foster father, and then he had a stepdaughter. He believed that the stepdaughter had gotten pregnant and had this boy out of wedlock. He believed the boy may have had some sort of accident and died, that his death was not intentional, and in order to cover it up and not out the stepdaughter as an unwed mother, they simply just dumped the body. However, despite all this circumstantial evidence, police could not find a connection between the foster home and these individuals and the boy, so that part of the investigation was closed. Here's an interesting fact though. Now, there's a group of retired policemen that actually work on this case, and in 1998, the foster father and the stepdaughter were interviewed again, and they found out that the foster father married the stepdaughter. So is there something to this, that maybe they had a relationship that wasn't really, good? I just found that interesting. In 2002, a woman named Martha came forward with a story for the authorities. Martha claimed when she was 11 years old, her very abusive mother had purchased this unknown boy from his birth parents the summer of 1954. Now, unfortunately, this boy was subjected to physical and sexual abuse for 2.5 years with this mother. Now, one evening during dinner, the boy had vomited up his meal of baked beans and was severely punished for it. Martha stated her mother slammed his head into the floor several times until he was semi-conscious. He then later would die from his injuries. Martha stated that this boy, who she called Jonathan, had very long hair, and after he died, his mother cut his hair in order to help hide his identity. Then Martha's mother made Martha go with her to dump the body in the Fox Chase area. She stated that while they were there and pulled over on the side of the road, that another motorist had come along and asked him if they needed help. Martha's mother told her to stand in front of the car's license plate so it couldn't be identified. After her mother assured the motorist that they were fine and they didn't need help, the motorist drove away and they dumped the body. What's intriguing here is that there are a few things that stood out to the police, that they were convinced of Martha's story, because it was never public information that the child had baked beans in his stomach and that his hair was cut hastily and after he was dead. So authorities were sort of convinced of her story. However, once again, in spite of these things, police were unable to verify Martha's story. The neighbors who had access to Martha's house during that time frame stated that there was never any boy there, or toddler, so to speak, at all. It was just Martha and her mother. Martha was also known to have a history of mental illness, and so a lot of people dismissed her story as ridiculous. Which, let me just say that people with mental illness always get a bad rap about lying. And in this case, if Martha's story is true, she probably does have a mental illness because of the abuse she went through as a child. And it's not a far-fetched to think that Martha's mother did this to this little boy as well, but yet because Martha suffered from mental illness, everybody just dismissed her story. I'm sorry, that just makes me so mad. Just because neighbors didn't know the boy was there, if he was very badly physically abused, she could have locked him up in a closet or a cupboard for all we know when guests were there, just so they didn't know the boy was there. You just never know. But that is my rant. I will get off my soapbox now. Now, unfortunately, because these theories kept getting kind of dismissed or closed, Remington became fascinated with this case, and he pursued it using his own money and time up until his death in 1993. Now, and I might not say this right, but it's the Vidocq Society. It's a group of retired policemen in Philadelphia took over where Remington left off on this case, and they still meet monthly. In 2013, they did get a lead where a guy came forward saying, around that time, around that area, I rented a house to a guy who said he sold his son. Now, I don't know how that comes into conversation when you're trying to rent a house, but anyway, that happened. So apparently they found this guy's brother, and they said that they compared the DNA, and unfortunately it was not a match. Now, I know a lot of people are like, sold their kid, like, but this was kind of a thing back there. You remember this famous picture? It wasn't I wouldn't say common, but it wasn't really something that didn't happen either. Now, the boy was originally buried in an unknown grave, or what's known as a potter's field. But in 1998, his body was dug up to get some DNA extraction, since that science had evolved so much, and so they would have it on file just in case anything ever came up. After they were done with that, he was reburied at the Ivy Hill Cemetery in Cedar Brook, Philadelphia, in a donated plot. There was also people who donated a gravestone as well, and the large headstone that was donated says America's Unknown Child, and the city residents keep the grave decorated with flowers and stuffed animals. So hopefully something comes out of this case too, especially when we have top-notch people working on it, but so far it's still unsolved. So what are your thoughts? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Do you think Martha was telling the truth? Because I'm sorry, that theory is the one that sticks out in my mind the most. Do you like these stories together? If so, let me too, because there are several stories out there that I want to share, but it's hard to find information, but they're so interesting as well. So if you like this sort of format, let me know as well, and I can do them every now and then. Please don't forget to subscribe, and we'll be back next Friday with another true crime case or mystery. Thanks for stopping by, guys. I so appreciate it.